do with Jacob Harrington, Andrew's sexy older brother. Just the thought of Jacob sent a twist of desire through her stomach. He had been this glorious one-night stand. Well, okay, it had actually been 3 nights, and yes, it had been incredible, and he'd been lovely and made her laugh. But she had drawn a line under it when she'd returned to her own home in St. Octavia. He had texted and phoned a few times, but she hadn't returned his messages, and when Willow tried to bring it up, Ruby had told her she didn't want to talk about Jacob Harrington. She wasn't interested in a relationship with him or anyone. Not anymore. She supposed she would have to face him at some point. He was Andrew's brother and would be bound to visit. But maybe if she got enough warning from Willow, she could make sure she was out of the way those days, or at least try to keep her head down. She looked around her. On the slopes leading up to the great castle was a tall Christmas tree with baubles as big as her head. Tiny lights twinkled in the darkness as they danced around the tree. It was an impressive sight, with the castle silhouetted behind it. There also appeared to be a life-size nativity scene set up in front of it, with a large open-faced barn. Mary and Joseph were kneeling around the manger, where presumably baby Jesus was wrapped up like an Egyptian mummy. There was no sign of the wise men or the shepherds, but as Ruby peered through the darkness, there was something moving in front of the barn. She climbed out of the car and realized there was a real donkey and 2 sheep grazing in a small paddock in front of the barn. Well, that was certainly taking the nativity scene very seriously. She knew Willow had been heavily involved in the decorations, although she hadn't mentioned a real-life nativity scene. Perhaps she'd done it to appease the older, more traditional members of the village. Feeling suddenly mischievous, she opened her boot and rooted around until she found the appropriate bag, and then walked up to the paddock. She knew donkeys could be quite unpredictable, and that some people use them as guard pets. But as Ruby approached the paddock, the donkey immediately ambled over to the fence. She stroked his velvety nose, and he seemed quite happy with that. She shoved her hands in the pockets of her coat for the chopped carrot she had bought as a snack from McDonald's on her way over here, and held one out. The donkey whiffled it up. The 2 sheep looked over with mild interest at the prospect of something to eat rather than grass or hay, but they didn't approach. She tossed the carrots over the fence in their direction, but they seemed scared by this gesture and quickly retreated to the furthest corner. Ruby looked around. As no one was about, she climbed over the fence. The donkey was unperturbed, and she approached the nativity scene. Mary and Joseph were huge. If they'd been standing, they would have been 7 or 8 feet tall, but as it was, they were kneeling down, leaning over the manger, which looked tiny in comparison. They looked creepy rather than realistic, and the model of Mary had very large hairy hands. In fact, it even looked like she might have had a beard at one point, which had been hastily painted over. Also, on closer inspection, Joseph was sporting an eye patch, although you wouldn't have been able to see that from the road as his face was turned to the side. Ruby laughed out loud when she spotted the hook instead of a hand. It seemed Willow might have got a cheap deal and found a couple of models of pirates to use for the nativity instead. The models had been dressed in real clothes and headdresses to make them look more authentic, so maybe Willow had thought no one would notice the pirate origins. Ruby glanced down at the baby Jesus, who thankfully was just a large doll covered in a blanket and not pirate-themed like his parents. She quickly looked around one more time and then swapped Jesus for a cuddly snowman, complete with top hat. She tucked the snowman under the blanket. She knew Willow would get a big kick out of this. Ruby and Willow had been playing jokes on each other every Christmas for many years, so it was good to get in first before Willow could get back and start her regime of practical jokes. Ruby made a move towards the fence, just as one of the sheep started making a weird choking noise. She turned round and could see bits of chewed carrot on the floor in front of the sheep as the animal continued to hack and cough. Bloody hell! Kidnapping baby Jesus was one thing, but killing one of the sheep within minutes of arriving in the village was a new low, even for her. She moved over to see what she could do, wondering how she could do the